А? Окей. Когда закончите, завершить трансляцию.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Today we continue talking about the anatomy of nervous system. Last semester you were finished anatomy of CNS, central nervous system, and today we are starting talking about anatomy of peripheral nervous system. Especially our lecture will be about the spinal nerves and nerve plexus. During our today's lecture, I will remind you phyla and ontogenesis of nervous system. Then we will discuss parts of peripheral somatic nervous system, formation and structure of the spinal nerve, its general principles of innervation, and biggest part of our lecture will be about formation, topography, and branches of somatic plexus, especially cervical, brachial, lumbar, and sacrococcygeal. I hope you all remember the embryonic origin of nervous system is the ectoderm, especially its parts which is known as the neuroectoderm. This neuroectoderm first forms the neural plate, where the invagination known as the neural groove is formed. Finally, the margins of this neural groove will match together and will form the neural tube. This neural tube giving rise to development of nervous system. Its cranial part will be developed to the brain and its caudal part will give rise to the spinal cord. I hope you all remember central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord. And everything located outside of the spinal cord and brain is known as the peripheral nervous system. And you can see on this slide this peripheral nervous system represented by the roots of the spinal and cranial nerves, nerve ganglia, then branches of spinal and cranial nerves, nerve plexuses, and peripheral nerves, which takes origin from the receptors or terminate by the nerve endings in the muscles. Basic process taking place in the nervous system is a reflex, which is provided by the reflex arc. The definition of the reflex arc will help you to understand the process of this reflex. So, reflex arc is a chain of the neurons conducting the impulses from the receptors to the effector organs. And on this diagram you can see three neuronic reflex arc, which is represented by three neurons. First neuron is the sensory neuron, which has cell body located inside of the spinal root ganglion or spinal ganglion. This ganglion is a type of sensory ganglion, and pay attention. It's located outside of the spinal cord, means it is a part of the peripheral nervous system. Spinal root ganglion houses cell bodies of the sensory neurons, represented by pseudo-unipolar neurons. You all have to remember pseudo, it means false, not true, because really these neurons have very short single process divided immediately into two more processes. First part is peripheral process, which performs the function of the dendrite and carries impulses from the receptors to the cell body of the neuron. And second part is the central process, which carries impulse from the cell body to the spinal cord, to CNS. Then it's synapsing with the association neuron or interneuron located in the gray matter of the spinal cord. These cell bodies of second neurons form sensory nuclei located mostly in the posterior horns of the spinal cord. Second neuron sends the axon to the third motor neuron, which is located in the anterior horns, and its axon will get two effector organs. For somatic nervous system, these effector organs are represented by the skeletal muscles. By means of this reflex arc, impulse from the receptor conducted to the effector, and this process known as the reflex. This scheme of the reflex arc will help you to understand how are the spinal nerves formed. Usually I'm talking to my student, spinal nerve is like a tree because it grows from the roots. Then roots join together and form trunk of the spinal nerve like in the tree, and then this trunk gives off the branches. Each of the spinal nerve has following branches. First one is the anterior primary branch or ramus anterior. Then is posterior primary branch or ramus posterior. Meningeal branch, which returns back through the intervertebral foramen to the vertebral canal and supplies to the dura mater spinalis. And communicating branches. Some of the spinal nerves have wide communicating branches, especially spinal nerves taking origin from the segments of the spinal cord with the lateral horns, especially with the intermediate lateral nucleus. This nucleus is a place of location of sympathetic centers, sending preganglionic fibers first through the anterior spinal root to the trunk of the spinal nerve, and then through the wide communicating branch to the sympathetic trunk ganglia. In this ganglia, the interconnection of fibers occur. It means one fibers will synapsing, preganglionic fibers will synapsing with the cell body of next neuron. And after this interconnection, postganglionic will be formed, postganglionic fibers will be formed, returning back to the spinal nerves. By this way, each of the spinal nerve will get postganglionic sympathetic fibers, and then any peripheral branch of spinal nerve will carry not only somatic, sensory and motor, but also vegetative fibers to the all structures supplied by the branches. As I told you before, main branches are the anterior and posterior. What are the differences in between them? Posterior branches supply to the dorsal surface of the trunk, means to the deep muscles of the back, muscles of the neck and occipital region, and also overlying skin. Some of these posterior branches are different from all another. For example, dorsal branch of cervical first spinal nerve is known as the suboccipital nerve. This suboccipital nerve supplies to the suboccipital muscles. That's why it carries just motor fibers. Dorsal branch of the second cervical nerve is the greater occipital nerve, nervus occipitalis major, which is purely sensory, and it supplies to the skin of corresponding region. All another dorsal branches are mixed. After that, after we will get to the lumbar, lateral parts of the dorsal branches, first to third lumbar nerves, will form sensory superior cluneal nerve, supplying to the skin in the upper gluteal region. Lateral parts of dorsal sacral first to sacral third spinal nerve will form sensory medial cluneal nerve, nervi clunei medii, also supplying to the gluteal region. Ventral branches of spinal nerves are much more thicker than the dorsal one. It is because the region of supply for ventral branches is bigger than for the dorsal. Because ventral branches supply to the ventral part of the neck, ventral part of the trunk, upper and lower limbs completely, including the muscles and skin. These ventral branches form plexuses, just except ventral branches of thoracic spinal nerve. So, cervical plexus is formed by the anterior branches of cervical first to cervical fourth spinal nerves. Also partly include upper portion of cervical fifth. Brachial plexus is formed by the anterior branches of cervical fifth to cervical eighth and upper portion of thoracic 1 spinal nerve. Intercostal nerves are formed by the anterior branches of thoracic 1 to thoracic 12 spinal nerves. Pay your attention. These ventral branches of thoracic spinal nerve do not form the plexus and supply to the thoracic wall according to the segmental principle, because in the thoracic cage in the thoracic wall, we can see brightly developed segmental structure represented by the 12 vertebrae, 12 pairs of ribs, and corresponding 12 intercostal spaces supplied by 12 intercostal nerves and corresponding vessels. 12 intercostal nerve, also known as the subcostal nerve, because it has no rib below. Lumbar plexus is formed by the anterior branches of thoracic 12 to L5 spinal nerves, and sacrococcygeal plexus, which is formed by the anterior branches of lumbar 4 to sacral 5 and coccygeal segment. Meningeal branch was mentioned before. It is sensory and supplies to the meninges, especially to the dura mater, which is just one, has sensory innervation. Communicating, I told you, represented by the white and gray. White branches present just in the spinal nerve, starting from the cervical 8 in all thoracic, lumbar 1 and lumbar 2, means in the segment where lateral horns present, and connect spinal nerves with the sympathetic trunk. But gray communicating branches formed by the postganglionic fibers pass from the ganglia of sympathetic trunk to absolutely all spinal nerves. And now we continue talking about somatic plexus. When you will describe somatic plexus, you have to describe it according to the schemas usually. And first you have to describe what are the segments forming this plexus. Means what is the origin for that somatic plexus. Then you have to talking about the topography. It means location, like the holotopy in the organs. You have to describe which part of the body is the plexus located. Maybe its projection to some vertebrae. Next you have to tell about classification of branches, pathway and topography of branches, and of course areas of innervation. And first, most easy in somatic plexus is the cervical plexus. Cervical plexus is located in the region of the neck and formed by the anterior branches of upper 4 cervical spinal nerves. It's located in between the deep muscles of the neck, between the provertebral and scalene muscle, anterior to the transverse processes of the cervical vertebrae. This plexus responsible for nerve supply of occipital region, posterior auricular region, completely neck, and also upper thoracic region. All branches of cervical plexus are classified into the sensory or cutaneous, motor or muscular, and mixed branches. Sensory branches, represented by the lesser occipital nerve, nervus occipitalis minor, supplying to the skin of corresponding region. Greater auricular nerve, which supplies to the skin posterior to the ear and partly to the skin of the auricle. transverse cervical nerve, which passes across the neck and supply to the skin in that region, and supraclavicular nerve, or better, even if you will tell, supraclavicular nerves, supplying to the skin just above and below to the clavicle, to the skin in the upper deltoid region, and even partly to the skin of the lower neck. Motor branches supply to the deep muscles of the neck. That's why these motor branches or motor nerves get the same names like the innervated muscles. For example, nerve to the anterior rectus muscle, or nerve to the longus capitis muscle, nerve to the scalenus anterior muscle, and so on. One of the motor branches is represented by the inferior root of ansa cervicalis. Ansa cervicalis can be translated as the cervical loop. This structure, formed by the motor fibers from the cervical plexus and also from the motor fibers of hypoglossal nerve. Hypoglossal nerve gives of superior root and cervical plexus gives inferior root of ansa cervicalis. This ansa cervicalis supplies to the muscles located below the hyoid bone. Maybe you remember these muscles also known as the infrahyoid muscles. Such muscles as the sternohyoid muscle, sternothyroid muscle, thyrohyoid muscle, and also omohyoid muscle. All these four muscles are supplied by the ansa cervicalis, formed by the hypoglossal nerve and inferior root from the cervical plexus. And mixed branch, which is only one, it is phrenic nerve, nervus phrenicus. It is mixed because it contains sensory, motor, and also vegetative fibers. It is only one mix, but it is the longest branch of the cervical plexus. This phrenic nerve takes origin from the cervical plexus. Pay attention, there are two cervical plexuses in the human body, right and left. That's why there are two phrenic nerves, right and left. These nerves pass down from the neck region and get to the superior thoracic aperture, then enter to the thoracic cavity via the superior thoracic aperture. And here we can see some differences in structure of the right and left phrenic nerves, in topography of that nerves. This difference is because of asymmetric location of great blood vessels in the thoracic region. So, right phrenic nerve enters thoracic cavity in between the right subclavian artery and right subclavian vein, while left phrenic nerve passes across the aortic arc. By this way, both right and left nerves enter to the superior mediastinum, then continue down anterior to the roots of the lungs, so located in the anterior mediastinum. In the thoracic cavity, phrenic nerve gives off some sensory branches. These sensory branches supply to the serous tunic located in that region. You all remember these serous tunics in the thoracic cavity represented by pericardium and also pleura. So phrenic nerve gives off pericardiac and pleuric branches. Then both right and left phrenic nerve get to the diaphragm and supply motor fibers to that diaphragm. After that, left phrenic nerve terminates this level and right one penetrates the diaphragm and continue to the abdominal cavity, where supplies to the peritoneum, by the way, also serostunic, in the region of the liver and gallbladder. Because of that, we can talk about the positive phrenic symptom in case of some disease of the liver and gallbladder. If we'll summarize about the region of supply for phrenic nerve, sensory fibers of phrenic nerve supply to the serostunic, to the pleura, to pericardium, and to peritoneum in the right upper side of abdominal cavity. Motor fibers of phrenic nerve supply to diaphragm. That's why such name phrenic nerve. Next plexus, one of the most interesting, is a brachial plexus. Brachial plexus is formed by the anterior branches of cervical 5th to cervical 8 spinal nerves, and also partly by the upper portion of thoracic 1st spinal nerve. Topographically, it consists of two parts: supraclavicular part, which is located in the interscalenus space, and infraclavicular part, which is located in the axillary cavity. These two topographical parts of the brachial plexus are having some structural differences. So, supraclavicular part of brachial plexus is represented by three trunks. Superior trunk formed by the anterior branches of cervical 5th and cervical 6th spinal nerves. Middle trunk, which is direct continuation of anterior branch of cervical 7th spinal nerve, and inferior trunk, which is formed by the anterior branch of cervical 8th spinal nerve and also upper portion of the thoracic 1st spinal nerve. After that, each of the trunks divide into the anterior and posterior portion. All three posterior portions match together, forming posterior cord of the brachial plexus. Anterior portions of superior and middle trunks will form lateral cord of brachial plexus, and anterior portion of inferior trunk will form middle cord of brachial plexus. This knowledge is about formation of the cords are quite useful to understand what are the segments participating in formation of this nerve. Supraclavicular part of brachial plexus mainly giving rise to short branches of brachial plexus, and infraclavicular part of brachial plexus giving rise to the long branches of brachial plexus mostly. So, short branches of the brachial plexus for better memorizing can be subdivided. Two branches passing to the back region to the scapular region, These short branches are represented by the dorsal scapular nerve, nervus dorsalis scapula, suprascapular nerve, and subscapular nerves, supplying to the muscles around the scapula. Another group of muscles supply to the regions of the chest and represented by the lateral and medial pectoral nerves supplying to the pectoralis major and pectoralis minor muscle, to the long thoracic nerve, something confusing, short branch, but long thoracic nerve. This nerve passes together with the lateral thoracic artery and corresponding vein and supply to the serratus anterior muscle and also to the skin in the region of the mammary gland. And subclavian nerve, which supplies to the subclavian muscle. Infraclavicular part of brachial plexus represented by mentioned above 3 cords. Medial cord gives rise to ulnar nerve, nervus ulnaris, medial root of median nerve, nervus medianus, and also 2 cutaneous nerves, nervus cutaneus brachiomedialis and nervus cutaneus antebrachiomedialis, supplying to the corresponding regions of the upper limbs skin. Lateral cord gives rise to musculocutaneous nerve and lateral root of median nerve. So pay your attention. Median nerve is formed by the lateral root from the lateral cord and medial root of the medial cord. By this way, it can be easily recognized because it's formed by merging of these roots. And posterior cord, the thickest one, giving rise to radial nerve and axillary nerve. About axillary nerve, we can find different points of view. Some scientists talking it is long branch because it rises from the infraclavicular part of the brachial plexus. Another talking it is short branch because it supplies to the shoulder girdle. And maybe it's true because it's not so long, it's really short. And it supplies to the deltoid muscle, enters to it along the posterior border and overlining skin forming the superior lateral cutaneous nerve of the arm. And radial nerve is the continuation of posterior cord of brachial plexus, which supplies to the all muscles and skin at the posterior surface of free upper limb. It gets to the dorsal surface of the hand, where it supplies to the skin at the dorsal surface of the hand, to the thumb, to the index finger, and also to the lateral half of the middle finger. Few words about the long branches. Pay your attention. Median and ulnar nerve pass together in the medial bicipital groove together with the brachial artery and brachial vein. These nerves have no branches along the arm region. After that, both of the nerves continue to the anterior region of the forearm. In the cubital fossa gives off some branches to the elbow joint, then continues to the forearm. Median nerve and ulnar as well have no cutaneous branches in the region of the forearm, because both of them supply to the anterior group of forearm muscles. It means to the flexors of the fingers and flexors of the hand. Ulnar nerve supplies just to the flexor carpi ulnaris muscle and also ulnar portion of the flexor digitorum profundus muscle. All another muscles in the anterior forearm region are supplied by the median nerve. Then both of the nerves continue to the region of the hand. Ulnar nerve supply to the muscles of the hypotenor and related skin, and also supplies to the skin of the little finger completely, and also medial side or ulnar side of the ring finger. All another ventral surface of the fingers means ventral surface of the thumb, ventral surface of the index and middle finger, and also radial side of the ring finger are supplied by the median nerve. At the dorsum of the hand, as I told you before, 2.5 fingers from the radial side are supplied by the radial nerve, and 1.5 are supplied by the ulnar nerve, just except distal phalanges, because all distal phalanges got nerve supply same like the palmar surface. As I told you before, anterior branches of thoracic spinal nerves form intercostal nerves without any plexus. These intercostal nerves pass along the intercostal spaces together with the corresponding arteries and vein, and each of them give off lateral and anterior part. Lateral part supplies to the skin, and corresponding muscles, and anterior part of intercostal nerve supplied to the anterior skin region and also intercostal muscles. Pay your attention. Lower 5-6 intercostal nerves continue downwards and supply to the upper part of the abdominal wall. Lumbar plexus, plexus lumbalis. It is formed by the anterior or ventral branches of thoracic 12, 1st to 5th lumbar spinal nerve. 5th just upper portion, just partly. Topographically, this plexus is located in the lumbar region in the thickness of psoas major muscle. That's why all branches of this plexus appear from the lateral or anterior border of the muscles. Branches of lumbar plexus. First is the iliohypogastric and ilioinguinal nerves. If you will look to the nerves, you can see these nerves are very similar to the thoracic 12 anterior branch, which is subcostal nerve, also passing between the muscles of the abdominal wall and supplying to it, and also supply to the skin of the abdominal wall. Next nerve is a genitofemoral nerve, nervus genitofemoralis. This nerve appears from the anterior border of psoas major muscle and then divides into the femoral branch and genital branch. Femoral branch passes deep to the inguinal ligament and then appears in the femoral region, supplying to the skin just below the inguinal ligament. Genital branch enters to the inguinal canal and supplies to the cremaster muscle, dartos tunica, and membranes of the spermatic cord in the males. In the females, it supplies to the structure located inside of the inguinal canal. It is ligamentum teres uteri, around ligament of the uterus. Branches of the genitofemoral nerve terminates in the skin of the mons pubis in the females and labia majora, and also in the skin of the scrotum, forming anterior scrotal branches in the males. Lateral cutaneous nerve of the thigh, nervus cutaneus femoris lateralis. The name of the nerve is the reflection of its function. It passes also deep to the inguinal ligament, close to the anterior superior iliac spine, and then continues superficially to the skin of the thigh and supplies to it up to the region of the knee joint. Biggest branch of lumbar plexus is, of course, femoral nerve, nervus femoralis. It mostly passes inside of the small pelvis and exits to the region of the thigh via the muscular space, lacuna musculorum. Maybe you remember this structure was described in the structure of the femoral canal. Here it passes together with the iliopsoas muscle. It's located most laterally to the femoral vessels. I will remind you, femoral vessels pass through the lacuna vasorum, through the vascular space. Located most laterally, and it is not so long. In the region of the thigh, its length is just about 4 centimeters. Because just after its appearing in the femoral region, in the femoral trigone, it gives off terminal branches. Of course, first, students' favorite, muscular branches, rami muscularis. These muscular branches supply mainly to the anterior thigh muscles, anterior muscles of the femoral region. I will remind you, these muscles responsible for flexion of the thigh in the hip joint and for extension of the leg in the knee joint. And represented biggest muscle is quadriceps femoris muscle, formed by the 4 muscles, vastus medialis, vastus lateralis, vastus intermedius, and rectus femoris muscle, supplied by the muscular branches of femoral nerve. That's why, if any damage occurs with the femoral nerve, most bright symptom will be impossibility to flex the thigh in the hip joint and extend it in the knee joint. Anterior and medial cutaneous branches of the thigh supply to the corresponding regions, to the anterior region of skin of the thigh and also to the skin located in the medial surface of the thigh. And of course, longest branch of the femoral nerve is saphenous nerve, nervus saphenous. This saphenous nerve passes as the component of neurovascular bundle of the thigh. Here it passes together with the femoral artery and femoral vein and does not give any branches in the region of the thigh. In the lower part of the thigh, the saphenous nerve enters to the adductor canal through its superior opening and then exits the canal through the anterior opening and appears just below to the patella, where first gives off cutaneous branch known as the infrapatellar nerve, supplying to the skin inferior to the patella. Then it continues downwards to the region of the leg and supplies to the skin of the anterior medial surface of the leg, where it is located superficially and passes together with the greater saphenous vein, and then continues to the medial edge of the foot and gets to the region of the big toe, but pay your attention, does not supply to the skin of the big toe. One more interesting branch of lumbar plexus is obturator nerve. Obturator nerve, nervus obturatorius. This nerve leaves the pelvic cavity via the obturator foramen, especially through the obturator canal. Maybe you remember this obturator canal formed by the obturator membrane, which practically completely closes the obturator foramen. So, nerve exits to the middle compartment of the thigh, and just it exits gives off acetabular branch supplying to the hip joint. Then nerve continues to the middle compartment and supplies to the most of the adductor muscles and also overlying skin. So please pay attention. In each of the muscular compartments of the upper limb or lower limb, we can find proper neurovascular bundle, which is responsible for blood supply and nerve supply of muscles in that compartment and overlying skin. It will be very useful for you for summarizing of material. You have to understand, for example, anterior compartment of thigh muscles is supplied by the femoral nerve. Middle compartment supplied by the obturator nerve. And about posterior we will talking later. Sacrococcygeal plexus. Plexus sacrococcygeus. It's a plexus formed by the anterior branches of L4, L5, all sacral, spinal nerves, and coccygeal. Topographically, sacrococcygeal plexus located in the small pelvis in the region of piriform muscle. This plexus gives off two kinds of branches. These branches are short and long branches. And before we'll describe these branches, we'll remember something about topography of the pelvic region. I hope you all remember in osteology we will study two notches, greater sciatic notch and lesser sciatic notch, which transformed by two ligaments, by the sacrospinous and sacrotuberous ligaments, into corresponding foramina, greater sciatic foramen and lesser sciatic foramen. I said that piriformis muscle passes through the greater sciatic foramen and divides it into the upper portion, which is the suprapiriform foramen, and lower portion, which is the infrapiriform foramen. These foramina will be very useful for understanding of the branches topography. So, short branches of sacrococcygeal plexus. These branches supply to the pelvic region, to the skin and muscles of the pelvic girdle, and also to some of the pelvic organs. And of course, first, muscular branches. Muscular branches supplying to the piriform muscle, supplying to the internal obturator muscle, and so on. And same like in the cervical plexus, these branches got the same names like the supplied muscles. Next of the short branches is the superior gluteal nerve, nervus gluteus superior. This superior gluteal nerve exits the pelvis via the suprapiriform foramen. By the way, here it passes to the corresponding vessels together with the superior gluteal artery and superior gluteal vein, and supplies to the same structure like supplied by the artery, especially to the gluteus minimus and gluteus medius muscles. Inferior gluteal nerve exits the pelvis via the infrapiriform foramen together with the corresponding vessels, and also long branches of the sacrococcygeal plexus. It supplies to the gluteus maximus and other gluteal region muscles. Of course, most interesting of the short branches is pudendus nerve, nervus pudendus. This pudendal nerve from the sacrococcygeal plexus then pass through the infrapiriform foramen, and via the foramen it leaves pelvic cavity. Then it loops over the ischial spine and returns back to the pelvic cavity via the lesser sciatic foramen. Via this lesser sciatic foramen, it enters to the ischiorectal or ischioanal fossa, where it gives off inferior rectal branches, also known as the inferior anal nerve. These inferior rectal branches supply to the external anal sphincter, musculus sphincter ani externus, and also the skin around the anus. Then this pudendal nerve gives off perineal branches. perineal branches supplying to the skin of perineum in the males and the females, and these perineal branches terminate by the posterior scrotal branches in the males or posterior labial branches in the females. Then pudendal nerve gives off deep perineal branches supplying to the deep muscles of perineum. And deepest branches of this pudendal nerve, dorsalis nerve of penis in the males or dorsalis nerve of clitoris in the females. So this nerve is the main nerve supplying to the external genital organs in the males and females. Long branches of sacrococcygeal plexus are represented by the posterior cutaneous nerve of the thigh and sciatic nerve, nervus ischiaticus. Both of the nerves exit the pelvis via the infrapiriform foramen. So let's summarize them. Infrapiriform foramen transmits inferior gluteal nerve, pudendus nerve, posterior cutaneous nerve of the thigh, sciatic nerve, and also inferior gluteal vessels. So you see so many structures pass through the infrapiriform foramen. Posterior cutaneous nerve of the thigh. This is the nerve which has the function described in its name. It exits the pelvis via the infrapiriform foramen and supplies to the skin in the posterior thigh region. Sciatic nerve, nervus ischiaticus, is the longest branch of sacrococcygeal plexus and is the thickest nerve in the human body. Its thickness can be compared with the thickness of the thumb in the person. This nerve exits via the infrapiriform foramen and appears most superficially in the thigh region just below to the gluteus maximus muscle. In this point, it can be palpated. This nerve then continues to the posterior compartment of the thigh, and pay your attention, has no cutaneous branches in the posterior region of the thigh because it supplies to the muscles of posterior compartment of the thigh, such as the biceps femoris muscle, semitendinous muscle, and semimembranous muscle. That's why the function of this muscle will be impossible in case of trauma or inflammation of ischial nerve. It means the person cannot flex the leg in the knee joint and also cannot completely extend the thigh in the hip joint. Then sciatic nerve gets to the popliteal fossa and here divides into the branches. These branches are tibial nerve, and common peroneal nerve, nervus peroneus communis. Tibial nerve, nervus tibialis, continues downwards through the cruropopliteal canal and then pass deep to the posterior leg muscles and supply to that muscles. Finally, it continues to the region of the foot where it divides into the medial and lateral plantar nerves, these terminal branches of tibial nerve. While common peroneal nerve passes towards the fibula and then divides into the superficial fibular nerve and deep fibular nerve. Superficial fibular nerve supplies to the peroneus longus and peroneus brevis muscles, means the muscles in the lateral compartment of the leg, and also related skin area. Deep peroneal nerve supplies to the interior muscles of the leg. And finally, superficial peroneal nerve passes along the lateral border of the foot and supplies to the skin at the dorsum of the foot along its lateral border. And deep peroneal nerve continue to the dorsum of the foot. If we'll summarize about the nerve supply of the free lower limb, in the region of the thigh, I will remind you there are three muscular compartments: anterior, posterior, and medial. So muscles in the anterior compartment are supplied by the muscular branches of femoral nerve. Muscles of the middle compartment of the thigh, adductor muscles, are mainly supplied by the obturator nerve. And muscles of the posterior compartment are supplied by the muscular branches of the sciatic nerve. Cutaneous innervation of the thigh. Anterior surface supplied by the anterior cutaneous nerves of the thigh from the femoral nerve. Anterior medial skin is supplied by the cutaneous branches of the obturator nerve. And skin at the posterior surface of the thigh are supplied by the posterior cutaneous nerve of the thigh, which is the branch of sacrococcygeal plexus. In the region of the lower leg, again three compartments. First one is the anterior compartment, second is posterior compartment, and third is lateral compartment. Muscles of the posterior compartment are supplied by the tibial nerve. By the tibial nerve, which is the branch of the sciatic nerve. Muscles of the lateral compartment are supplied by the superficial peroneal nerve, which is the branch of common peroneal from the same sciatic nerve. And muscles in the anterior compartment are supplied by the deep peroneal nerve, which is also from the sciatic nerve. So, if we'll summarize in the region of supply for sciatic nerve, you can see it is muscles of the posterior compartment of the thigh, then muscles and skin in the region of the leg practically completely, just except the skin of anterior medial surface of the leg, which is supplied by the saphenous nerve. Then branches of the sciatic nerve continues to the region of the foot, where supplies completely to the all muscles of the foot and skin of the foot also practically completely, just except the middle border of the foot, which is supplied by the saphenous nerve. That's all I'd like to tell you today. We haven't do the break, that's why we finished our lecture. And if you have any questions, I'm ready to answer it. If you have no questions, thank you for your attention. Goodbye, good luck, and take you care. Thank you. See you. Bye-bye.